When you spoke on unions and you spoke on how we can confront unions, do you have any ideas on how communities and organizations can go at this grand jury problem?
Well, for one thing, we should be flooding the prosecutor's office with messages saying no grand jury, demanding that there be no grand juries in these cases, because grand jury, again, is all behind closed doors. It's a secret process designed to let the cops off. So we should always be saying no grand jury. That's unacceptable. In Ramsey County, which is the county that holds St. Paul, they still use a grand jury process. And there was a case here, a man that was killed by the St. Paul police last May. And the family, and it was under very mysterious circumstances, and it was just a really ugly case. And the family found out that the grand jury was going to be held on starting December 21st. So there's two giveaways here. One is, of course, it's going to be harmful to the family for this to be at that time period. This was their very first Christmas without their loved one and so forth. But the second thing is, whenever there's any kind of a legal proceeding that happens right before a holiday, it's because they want it to go real fast. And in grand juries, if it goes real fast, it means they're not going to be looking at very much evidence. And if they're not looking at evidence, then it's a process that's a sham process, right? So we mounted a campaign basically to get people to call the prosecutor and say, no grand jury, but if you're going to do a grand jury, do it after the first of the year. You will not be doing that before the first of the year. Let these people alone, And so we had letters, we had people calling, all kinds of things like that, and they backed off and dropped it before the end of the year. So that was a pretty significant thing. We still say no grand jury, but we don't think we're going to be able to get that quite pulled off in this case. But we did get that pulled off in the Philando Castile case and in the Jamar Clark case. The big question, though, is what did they do after no grand jury? And in the case of Jamar Clark, they just flubbed the investigation to make sure that there were no charges. So, you got to stay on top of these guys every inch of the way.
Right. You really can't let up because they the moment they see a way to gain some ground, they take it. And that's, this is a little off topic, but I feel this is how we have become a police and surveillance state is, the moment we don't pay attention, the government just kind of moves in and gains a little ground, and then they're like, now here we are. Oh, look over there. And then,
and frankly, I put some of that on the national movement a bit. Back when Obama announced this task force on 21st century policing, I put together, because I told you I'm pretty connected to the national movement and know people all over the country that do this work. But when I refer to a national movement, we don't really have a national movement in police accountability. We have a lot of groups doing very good work in a lot of places, but we aren't connected in the deep way that we need to be. And that's one of my goals for the movement, is for us to become more connected to each other and to do work that's complementary so that we support each other. Because one of the things I said right before this is I put out a piece that talked about why we needed to come up with our own agenda, because the failure for us to define what we want as a movement makes room for things like this stupid 21st century task force to basically put out as the agenda for the movement the lowest possible common denominator, the lowest, stupid things like body cameras and crap that aren't going to do anything to help anybody. And it's really things that are meant to placate the movement and make people think that something's happening while actually maintaining the status quo. And that is like the oldest trick in the book, the oldest game. They've always done it. And if we don't define for ourselves what our, our agendas need to look like, then we just have all of that kind of stupidness going on. So I still think that there's a real important place in the movement to really be a movement, a national movement, and to support each other and to work in unison on some kinds of goals. And it doesn't have to be a lot of goals. It could be 3-4 things that we demand as a movement, like getting rid of grand juries everywhere, ensuring the police everywhere, things like that. Independent investigations and independent prosecutions of police, things like that need to happen on a national basis as well as locally, that we could be pushing for, that would be so much better than stupid body cameras and stupid crap that the DOJ is pushing that won't do anything except maintain the status quo.
I'm really glad to hear you talk about that initiative, that committee, whatever thing that Obama put together. I didn't even follow it that much because I knew all it was this issue had suddenly become big, and it was just the government's way of trying to take control of the situation and the narrative, and that's all it is. It's just their way of trying to water down any efforts for reform.
That's exactly right. It's also their way of trying to, control, like you said, control the narrative, control the perimeters of what it is that people are going to be allowed to talk about and what it is that we're going to be allowed to demand. And so by, doing this, and part of it was really funny because people were really buying into it. They're like, oh, we're going to go town to town and talk to people. They went to 2 towns, one of them being D.C., which is where their butts sit right now, and the other one was someplace in Indiana or something. And the people that they had on this task force, they're like, oh, we're going to have members of the community and blah, blah, blah. Not a single person on that task force has any history in the police accountability movement. But this is the kind of shams they do. And by the way, they don't just do this on that national basis. The DOJ has put together this little road show where they're showing up in all these communities, like they showed up in Minneapolis, National Institute for Trust and Justice, that's their new deal, and they have these, and it's under a program called COPS, COPS, that stands for Community Oriented Policing Solutions or something like that. These things are basically, again, ways to placate people. They come into town, they put together some kind of local committee, and that local committee is always populated with people that are, like, in Minneapolis, people that are heads of organizations that get funding from the city. Not anybody the community picked, people with no history in this movement, who know nothing about the problems of it, know nothing about the policies and the issues and the things that people are trying to get to happen. And they have no history, no attachment to the movement, not even an interest in knowing what we think about, right? And they're in there doing all this planning and crap, and it's bogus. And nothing good can come out of those things. But boy, people will feel like something's happening because people are having meetings and blah, 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 and all this stuff. But these things are all designed to placate people and to maintain the status quo. And people have to be aware of that stuff. And again, that's under Obama now, okay?
Mm-hmm. It's basically propaganda strategy. Like when people think of propaganda, and I'm a trained ad man myself, so I have this is an area I have a lot of understanding of. But when people think of propaganda, they think of posters and slogans and stuff, and that's part of it. What people don't realize is there's a whole lot of other stuff. Propaganda, good propaganda campaign goes way beyond that into seizing the narrative and propping up false groups. And, I encourage everybody to look into Edward Bernays. He's the father of modern PR and how he did the things he did, how he got fluoride in our water normalized and this kind of thing. But I kind of digress there. But
yeah, what you're talking about is right, because there's a lot of groups even that have tried to come in and sort of kind of co-opt the police accountability movement, like MoveOn.org co-opted the anti-war movement, and became like sort of this front group of the Democratic Party. Much like that, there have been groups that are trying to pull some of that crap in the police accountability movement, and I've definitely seen it. It's been you asked me a while ago what's gone on in the last few years. I think there's a lot of very good things that have gone on. Like I said, I was thanking Ferguson every day, and tons of young people are coming into this movement, which is fabulous. There was a little bit of an issue with some of these younger folks having a bit of arrogance, not wanting to learn from the people that already know what they're doing in this movement. And I don't want to beat on young people, though, because I love the energy. The energy is fabulous. I just want them to take a little tiny step back and be willing to learn, because, we had in the Twin Cities here after Philando Castile, we have had a huge just bubbling up of all these groups in the Twin Cities, new groups of young activists. But at the same time, they weren't understanding about COINTELPRO and things like that. And some of us had to spend some time sort of educating people, because they weren't understanding why things kept happening to them. They would do their planning, and it's because they were talking to cops and telling them what they're planning to do. And things like that, you don't need to negotiate with the city to do a protest. Just do your protest. We had to give them education about some of that stuff, because they didn't know the roles that these characters play and things like that. So there's been kind of a little of that, but really it's been really good these last few years. But just like anything else, we are now starting to see these groups that are really fronts for Democratic Party or the federal government or whatever, that are acting like they're part of this movement, but they're really not. They're co-opting the movement. So we have to all, be clear on our goals and be careful and do work that keeps us safe so that we can avoid problems. And then, like I said, we, have to be clear on our goals. And when we're not clear on our goals, that's when we start to fall apart and not be as successful.
Right.